Tonight's story is not fiction. It is not a legend whispered in the dark. This is the real, documented case of Anneliese Michel, a case so disturbing, even the church tried to bury its echoes. Her name was Anneliese Michel, a quiet girl from a small Bavarian town, born into a life of faith, routine, and ordinary childhood dreams. No one who met her in those early years could have imagined the darkness that would one day coil around her life, or the terror that would echo far beyond her small German village. She was bright, soft-spoken, deeply religious, and devoted to her family. A girl who prayed before sleep, helped her mother with chores, laughed with her sisters, and hoped for nothing more than a peaceful future. But sometimes, fate does not whisper its warnings. It watches silently as the veil between this world and something far darker begins to thin. By the time the world learned her name, it was already too late. This is not a myth, nor a campfire tale. This is a true story, documented, recorded, witnessed, and investigated. A story that shook an entire country, brought the Catholic Church under fire, and left behind 67 tapes of raw, chilling audio that still haunt those who hear them. Tonight, we descend into the life of Anneliese Michel, not the girl she once was, but the girl she became, the girl trapped between medicine and faith, between reality and the unexplainable, between the living and the unknown. You are about to step into a world where science failed to give answers, where faith pushed beyond its limits, and where a young woman's silent suffering turned into one of the most disturbing possession cases in modern history. This is her beginning, the first shadow, the first crack in the light. The story of Anneliese Michel begins here. Her name was Anneliese Michel. She was born on the 21st of September 1952 in a peaceful village built on cobblestone streets, old church bells, and the kind of silence that makes nights feel both comforting and a little too still. Her family was deeply Catholic, disciplined, and unwavering in faith, and Anneliese grew up within that faith like a candle sheltered in the center of a dark room. She was gentle by nature, soft-spoken, and deeply devoted. Teachers described her as intelligent and dedicated. Friends remembered her as shy but kind, the type of girl who always offered a seat, shared a book, or whispered a prayer of comfort when someone else had fallen apart. She was normal, just like any other girl, laughing in school corridors, doing her studies, dreaming of a future she believed God had planned for her. But even in those early years, there was something unsettling about her quietness, something no one recognized at the time. Not darkness, just the faint sense that her spirit was too delicate, too thin, like something the world could tear with a single pull. Her family's faith shaped everything. Sundays meant church, evenings meant prayer, and guilt hung in the house like a second wallpaper. Sins were no small matter. Salvation was fragile, and though Anneliese loved God, she feared him just as deeply. That fear, planted early, would one day bloom into something far more terrifying. But for now, her life was bright. She played piano, she studied hard, she laughed with her sisters, she walked home under the soft Bavarian sunsets, unaware that those very skies would one day witness her descent, because the darkness was coming, quietly, patiently, like a shadow slipping across the floor, inch by inch. And Anneliese, sweet, faithful, hopeful Anneliese, had no idea that her early life, filled with innocence and soft light, was simply the calm before a storm no human being should ever have to face. It happened in 1968, when Anneliese Michel was just 16, a quiet Bavarian evening when the sky hung low and colorless, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Anneliese had returned from school only an hour before, tired but cheerful, unaware that her life was about to fracture into two halves, before and after. She had always been a girl of gentle expression and soft faith, the kind who walked lightly, spoke politely, and believed the world was fundamentally good. But on that evening, fate decided to show her a darker truth. She was lying in her bed, books scattered beside her, preparing for the next day. Her family remembered hearing nothing unusual, not a scream, not a cry, only the sudden thud against the wooden floor. When her mother rushed in, she found Anneliese rigid, her body twisted unnaturally, as if an invisible force had gripped her spine and frozen her in place. Her arms were stiff, her fingers curled, her lips trembling violently without sound. Her eyes rolled backwards, showing only a thin glimmer of white dot. It lasted only a few minutes, but for the Michel family, it felt like an eternity stretched open. When it was over, Anneliese gasped, as if surfacing from deep water. Her breathing was sharp and desperate, and her skin glistened with cold sweat. She looked around the room with a strange, fearful confusion, as though the world no longer matched what she remembered. Her mother asked her what happened, but Anneliese could barely speak. All she whispered was, "Something pressed me down." The doctors later called it temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that can distort perception, alter emotions, and blur the boundary between consciousness and nightmare. But to Anneliese, it was something far more terrifying than a medical term. She described the sensation of being pinned, like a heavy shadow had pressed her chest and drained the air from her lungs. She said she could hear murmurs, whispers, fragments of voices that did not belong to anyone in the room. In the days that followed, the nightmares began. Anneliese would wake up shaking, convinced she could feel something crawling over her bed. Her room, once a place of safety, started to feel colder, heavier, as if the air itself was watching her. Doors creaked when no one touched them. She began to hear faint footsteps outside her bedroom at night, soft but deliberate, pacing back and forth. Her family tried to reassure her it was stress, exhaustion, nothing more. But Anneliese knew something had changed inside her. She felt it like a bruise beneath her thoughts, a crack, a shadow. The first seizure didn't just mark the beginning of an illness, it marked the quiet opening of a door no one realized existed, and one no human being was ever meant to walk through. And on the other side of that door, something had begun to take interest in her. Night had always been familiar to Anneliese Michel, a soft curtain that closed over the fields of Klingenberg, a quiet hush that lulled her world into rest. But in the months following her first seizure, night began to change. It thickened, it stretched, it breathed, it waited, and for reasons she could not explain, Anneliese felt as if something unseen waited with it. It began subtly, like the faintest shiver of cold brushing the back of her neck as she prepared for bed. At first, she tried to convince herself that the house simply creaked with age. Old Bavarian homes always whispered, wood settling, wind passing through narrow corridors, animals scurrying in the attic. She had grown up with those sounds. They were harmless, but now every sound carried intention. Every creak felt like a step. Every whisper of wind felt like breath, and the darkness in her room no longer sat passively in the corners. It seemed to gather like a living thing, thickening near the wardrobe, pooling under the bed, clinging to the ceiling like damp soot at night. When the farmhouse went still, Anneliese remained awake, not because she wanted to, but because something in her body refused to let her sleep. Her heart raced without reason, her palms grew cold, and a strange dread crawled through her stomach like a warning. It was on one of those nights, an early winter night bitter enough to numb the windows, that the first true fright came. She had been lying on her back, staring at the faint moonlight cutting across her ceiling. The house was silent, except for the occasional sigh of the wind drifting past the shutters. Then, without warning, the air in her room shifted. It didn't grow colder, it grew heavy, as if the very atmosphere thickened around her bed. The pressure pushed into her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She sat up slowly, pressing a trembling hand over her heart, and that was when she heard it. A sound so low, so distorted. She wasn't sure if it came from somewhere in the room or from inside her own mind. It was a growl, not loud, but unmistakable. A deep, guttural rumble, animalistic and wet, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. Her breath froze in her throat. It came again, this time from the corner near her wardrobe, a place utterly drowned in shadow. Her first instinct was to run to her parents' room, but her legs refused to move. Her muscles locked, stiff as stone, as the air around her seemed to pulse with the growl's echo. After several unbearably long seconds, the sound faded, but its impression remained, crawling under her skin long after silence returned. She told no one. Even she wasn't sure she believed what she heard, so she convinced herself it had been a fragment of dreaming, a leftover hallucination from her seizure, something her mind had stitched together out of fear, exhaustion, and medication. But the growl was only the beginning. Over the next several months, Anneliese began waking to the feeling of a weight pressing onto her chest. Not a seizure, not sleep paralysis, something different, something conscious. She would lie helpless in the dark while the pressure pinned her down, making each breath a battle. Her throat tightened, her eyes watered, and often, far too often, she sensed a presence inches from her face, watching, waiting. Sometimes she smelled it, a rancid stench, foul and choking, like burning refuse mixed with rotting meat, the kind of smell no room should ever hold. Sometimes she heard it, a hiss at her ear, a whisper too fast and garbled to recognize as language, and sometimes she saw it, not fully, never clearly. Only glimpses, a darker shadow within the shadows, shifting when nothing else moved. A shape that stood too tall, or too crooked, or too close to her bed. She began sleeping with her lamp on, when even the lamp wasn't enough. She began sleeping with her door open. When that failed, she began praying in the early hours of the morning, whispering words she had known since childhood, clutching her rosary until her fingers hurt. Yet the nights only grew worse. Her family noticed the change. Her mother saw her pale complexion, her sunken eyes, the way she startled at every sudden noise. Her sisters whispered about hearing her pacing the hallway at 3 a.m., or catching us staring blankly at the wall, as if listening to something they could not hear. But Anneliese didn't know how to explain it, because she didn't understand it herself. One night, she awoke to the sound of scratching. Not the soft scratching of a mouse inside the walls. She knew that sound well. This was closer, louder. It came from under her bed. She froze. The blankets pulled tight under her chin. Scratch, scratch, dot, a slow, dragging scrape of fingernails against wood. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she stared at the edge of her mattress. For several minutes, the scratching continued, rising and falling, as if whatever lurked beneath was exploring the wooden planks with deliberate curiosity. When the scratching stopped, she thought it was over. She was wrong. A sudden thud hit the underside of her mattress, hard enough to jolt her entire bed frame. She let out a panicked cry and stumbled out of bed, rushing into the hallway. Her parents found her trembling and breathless. When they searched her room, nothing was there. Not under the bed, not in the wardrobe, not in the corners where the shadows always seemed to. Her father insisted it must have been a nightmare, but Anneliese knew what she heard. She knew what she felt. Something had touched the underside of her bed. Something with hands. The house's atmosphere shifted entirely after that night. She felt watched everywhere she went, in her bedroom, in the hallway, even at the dinner table. Sometimes she sensed it, standing just behind her as she brushed her teeth. Other times, she felt it sitting in the backseat of the car on the drive to school. These moments of dread became her constant companions, but the worst moments came during prayer. Whenever she prayed, especially when she held a crucifix, the pressure in her chest returned. The air tightened around her, and the whispers grew louder, curling around her thoughts like smoke. It was as if something unseen recoiled at the sound of prayer and wanted her to stop, and slowly, as the darkness deepened, Anneliese Michel realized something terrifying. Her seizures had not frightened her as much as this, because the seizures came from her body, but this felt as though it came from the dark itself. By the time Anneliese had reached her late teens, the shadows that had first crept into her life no longer lingered only at the edges of her perception. They had begun to consume her entirely. What had once been sporadic hallucinations, fleeting sensations, and restless nights had evolved into a relentless assault, one that claimed every quiet moment, every fragment of safety she once knew. Anneliese's world became a waking nightmare, a place where reality and something far darker intertwined until they were indistinguishable. She stopped eating. It was not simply a refusal born of stubbornness or illness, it was an almost ritualistic rejection of sustenance. Bread, milk, vegetables, all were touched by unseen hands that whispered poison to her mind. She claimed the food carried the essence of demons, that every bite would strengthen the malevolent forces inhabiting her body. Days and nights merged as she sat in the cold shadows of her bedroom, trembling, refusing to eat, her fingers clawing at the wooden floor as if to anchor herself to a world slipping further from her grasp. Her body, once delicate yet strong, began to weaken in alarming ways. Bones pressed sharply beneath her skin, her joints ached with every movement, her chest hollow from a lack of nourishment, and yet her mind refused to relent to anything human. Her behavior became erratic and horrifying. She tore at her clothes with desperate ferocity, screaming that invisible hands were violating her, clutching her, dragging her toward some unseen abyss. Her screams would echo through the house in the dead hours of the night, a chilling symphony of terror that left her family frozen in a mixture of fear and helplessness. The soft-spoken girl they once knew had vanished. In her place stood a creature of terror, her eyes wide and glassy, her body contorted in unnatural postures, her voice swinging unpredictably between shrill, high-pitched cries and guttural, inhuman growls that seemed impossible to produce from a human throat. The darkness that haunted her nights began seeping into her days. Even in daylight, she refused to eat, barely spoke, and often collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Her family tried desperately to maintain a sense of normalcy, feeding her gently, coaxing her with comforting words, praying beside her, but nothing worked. The evil they feared was not merely in her mind. It seemed to fight back against every act of kindness, every attempt to care for her. Objects in her room shifted inexplicably. Doors opened and closed without touch. The floorboards creaked under invisible weight, and sometimes the house itself seemed to sigh with an oppressive, almost sentient presence that responded to her torment. Her voice, already a tool of terror, became more alarming. At times she spoke in a dialect no one had ever taught her. At others, she muttered prayers in Latin she had never learned. She would scream insults to unseen tormentors, arguing back in a language that sounded older than any living tongue. She barked at her family as if they were enemies, recoiled violently when anyone tried to help, and occasionally laughed in ways that chilled the heart, a dry, echoing sound devoid of joy. These moments of apparent possession were terrifying in their intensity, so sudden and violent that they left even seasoned priests and medical professionals questioning what they were witnessing. At night, her suffering intensified. The paralysis returned more frequently, trapping her in her own body, while horrifying visions closed in. Shadows crawled across her walls, tall and twisted, their eyes glowing with some malevolent life. She would thrash against the invisible weight that pressed her into the bed, clawing at the mattress and sheets until they shredded beneath her fingers. The voices mocking, pleading, commanding multiplied, overlapping into a cacophony of torment that could reduce anyone listening to panic. The room would grow cold, the air thick and damp, as if the very atmosphere conspired to suffocate her. And through it all, her mind screamed in defiance, refusing to submit to what had invaded her. Her family, torn between desperation and fear, sought medical intervention. Yet each hospital visit brought only frustration. Doctors diagnosed psychosis, severe epilepsy, depression, but the medications, the restraints, the interventions, they failed to alleviate the torment. The darkness in her room, in her mind, was unaffected by medicine. It responded only to ritual, to prayer, to the desperate efforts of her parents and, eventually, the priests who would attempt to confront what they believed were genuine demonic forces. As weeks turned to months, Anneliese's strength deteriorated further. She would collapse in the hallway, her body trembling, bones exposed beneath fragile skin. Her hair became unkempt, her nails cracked and broken from endless scratching, her lips raw from dry screams. And yet, paradoxically, there were moments when she displayed unnatural strength, lifting herself from beds she could not normally rise from, throwing furniture, and moving with sudden, terrifying force. It was as if some external will had taken control, bending her frail body to impossible demands, further convincing those around her that something beyond ordinary illness had claimed her entirely. The who would later record her sessions, described her as both fragile and formidable human, and yet not entirely human. She would scream with voices that seemed to echo from deep within multiple throats, growl with the authority of ancient rage, and yet collapse moments later, barely able to sit upright. Every session drained her physically, yet they seemed to energize the force within her, driving the struggle to ever greater intensity. In these months of torment, Anneliese existed in a world no one else could enter. Each day blurred with night, each meal refused, each prayer muttered, each scream uttered, pushed her further from the reality that the rest of the world inhabited. Her parents, already broken with fear and guilt, clung to the church's guidance, convinced that ritual and prayer were the only salvation, and as her body waned, her mind remained sharp, trapped in a waking nightmare where she faced forces no one else could perceive, forces that had turned her own flesh into a battlefield. It was in this period of loss of control, when the human and the supernatural collided so violently, that the tragedy of Anneliese Michel reached its terrifying apex. She became a vessel for suffering, her mind a landscape of shadows and screams, her body a fragile instrument of impossible endurance. And through it all, the question lingered in the hearts of those who watched: was this truly possession? Or had illness alone become so horrifying that it could mimic the supernatural? For Anneliese herself, there was no distinction, only the endless, unrelenting presence of darkness pressing against her, whispering, clawing, waiting. As the years of torment stretched on, Anneliese Michel's life became a battle not merely between body and mind, but between faith and reason, prayer and medicine, light and an encroaching darkness that refused to yield. By 1973, the seizures, hallucinations, and violent episodes that had once been sporadic had transformed into an unbroken chain of suffering. Each night brought new horrors. The shadows that had first haunted her room as whispers now moved with purpose, encircling her bed, creeping along the walls, watching her every movement. She could no longer eat, sleep, or rest in any semblance of peace. Her body, malnourished and frail, trembled under the weight of unseen forces, yet her mind remained disturbingly alert, recording, reacting, and resisting in ways that terrified even her closest family. Medical professionals had tried everything within their arsenals: antipsychotics, anti-seizure medications, but nothing worked. The drugs dulled her body's responses but did not touch the terror within. She would collapse into herself, whispering that the medicines themselves were tainted, tools of the demons trying to control her, prevent her from achieving some unknown purpose. Her parents, torn between trust in science and trust in their faith, found themselves powerless witnesses to her agony. Every failed treatment strengthened their fear that the forces tormenting Anneliese were not of this world. In daylight, she appeared almost human, silent, withdrawn, occasionally responding in monosyllables, but at night, she became something else entirely. The paralysis returned with a vengeance, locking her body in place, while unseen hands pressed upon her chest and shoulders. The shadows moved faster now, darting along the ceiling and walls, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to leer down at her. She screamed at them, shouted prayers, and sometimes begged them to leave, only for the air to grow colder, the pressure to intensify, as if the very room conspired against her. Her parents, desperate for answers, reached out once more to the church. They were met with resistance. Priests insisted that the girl needed continued psychiatric care, that exorcism was unnecessary, that nothing she described could be real. But in those moments, when she cried out in a voice layered with multiple tones, when she spoke in tongues she had never learned, when she levitated slightly above her bed in sudden, impossible arcs of motion, it became harder to deny that something far beyond medicine was at play. Father Ernst Alt, one of the first priests to approach the Michel family, observed Anneliese in her private moments. He noticed details that terrified him, the unnatural contortions of her body, the guttural sounds emanating from her throat, the strange, piercing eyes that seemed to reflect not a single consciousness, but many. He listened as she recited prayers in Latin she had never studied, and he heard her speak names of demons as though they were familiar, intimate, and commanding her attention. To him, it was clear this was no ordinary illness. The turning point arrived in late 1975. Anneliese's body had weakened almost beyond endurance, yet her episodes grew more intense. She refused all food and water, claiming the demons would prevent her from surviving if she ate. Her parents were horrified, torn between allowing her to suffer for unknown spiritual reasons or forcing her into medical intervention, which they feared would anger the forces tormenting her. In her fragile skeletal state, she would scream for hours, violently resisting anyone who came near, striking out, her voice rising and falling in tones that seemed older than time itself. In these moments, the idea of faith versus medicine became more than a theoretical debate. It was a life-and-death struggle. Every failed attempt at medical intervention was perceived as a confirmation of the demon's power. Every prayer, every exorcism ritual attempted in secrecy seemed to provoke a response. Growls from her throat, objects thrown across rooms, the oppressive cold of a room that felt alive. The stakes were clear. Either the demons would be confronted directly, or Anneliese would be lost entirely. The church, finally acknowledging the gravity of her condition and the undeniable signs she displayed, reluctantly authorized a full exorcism. This decision was unprecedented. Priests had hesitated for years, insisting medicine should prevail. Yet now, even the institution that had once denied the possibility of possession was forced to confront the evidence. For the Michel family, it was both a relief and a terror. Prayers might save her, or the rituals might awaken something even more powerful within. When the exorcisms began, it was as though the air itself changed. Her body became the battleground. She contorted into impossible positions. Her voice shifted between tones inhuman and terrifyingly coherent. She spoke of demons who claimed to control her every thought, naming ancient evils, whispering threats, cursing the living and the dead. The rituals did not bring immediate relief. Instead, they seemed to escalate the torment, drawing the darkness into sharper focus. The priests, trained in rites and scripture, found themselves witnessing phenomena they had only ever feared in legend. This period marked a critical turning point, not just in Anneliese's life, but in the understanding of the events themselves. For the first time, medicine and faith collided head-on. Medical interventions had failed. Prayers and rituals were no longer optional. They were the only possible means of intervention. And yet, even as the exorcisms commenced, It was clear that Anneliese was caught in a liminal space, between life and death, between the human and the supernatural. Each session left her exhausted, her body trembling, yet the presence she battled within seemed undiminished, perhaps even strengthened by the attention. The terror she endured was not merely physical. It was psychological, spiritual, and deeply existential. Her mind, sharp, even in malnutrition and exhaustion, registered every shadow, every whisper, every unnatural movement of air. She felt the weight of unseen forces pressing upon her, demanding obedience, punishing defiance. She spoke of their names, their history, their hatred, and their purpose. She resisted them with every ounce of remaining strength, yet she was trapped within her own body, a prisoner of both human fragility and supernatural assault. As the turning point unfolded, her family and the priests understood the limits of human comprehension. Medicine could no longer protect her. Faith, though powerful, could only attempt to confront forces beyond ordinary understanding. And Anneliese, caught in the crucible of this struggle, became both victim and battlefield. Her fragile body and tormented mind at the mercy of entities that none could see or fully comprehend. In these months, the lines between illness and possession blurred. Each scream, each gesture, each whispered word seemed both natural and impossible. The household became a theater of fear, ritual, and despair. And it was here, in the suffocating tension of medicine failing and faith being tested, that the story of Anneliese Michel reached its most haunting, irrevocable stage. A young woman on the brink of death, consumed by forces visible only to her, struggling between the human and the incomprehensible, with the world watching, powerless. This was the moment when faith and medicine could no longer coexist peacefully. One had to dominate, and in doing so, they revealed the full horror of the darkness that had claimed Anneliese Michel, forcing everyone around her to confront questions they had never imagined. How much suffering can one human endure? And what truly dwells in the spaces that science cannot explain? By 1975, Anneliese Michel's suffering had reached a point that medicine could no longer touch. Her parents, desperate and terrified, finally convinced the church to intervene. Two priests, Father Ernstalt and Father Arnold Rent, were assigned to conduct the exorcism, a ritual that would transform the Michel household into a place of unimaginable terror. The exorcisms were not brief ceremonies. They lasted 4 hours, often stretching into the night, sometimes up to 4 hours per session. Over the next 10 months, the priests performed 67 documented exorcisms. Each session was a battle, a collision of faith against something incomprehensibly dark that seemed to writhe within Anneliese's fragile body. During these rituals, Anneliese's body contorted in ways that defied human anatomy. She would scream in multiple voices at once, some shrill and anguished, others guttural and commanding, as though several entities spoke through her simultaneously. She spoke in languages she had never learned, Latin, archaic dialects, and strange guttural sounds that chilled the hearts of those listening. She cursed her tormentors, pleaded for mercy, and growled with a voice that seemed not her own. The priests documented her cries, the violent thrashing, the unnatural strength she displayed despite her starving body. She would sometimes levitate slightly above her bed, hurl objects, or resist all attempts at restraint. Her knees and elbows bled from relentless kneeling, her throat raw from screaming, and yet the rituals continued. Each prayer and command a desperate attempt to push back the darkness inside her. Anneliese claimed multiple demons had possessed her, naming Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Nero, and others. She said they whispered to her constantly, mocking her, threatening her soul, and controlling her body. The priests believed her torment was real, and their prayers intensified, calling upon God to force the entities from her. The house became a chamber of fear, the air cold and oppressive, shadows twisting along the walls, and a pervasive sense that something otherworldly was observing every movement. Despite the priest's relentless efforts, Anneliese's condition worsened. Her body was wasting away. Her mind was sharp, yet trapped in a nightmarish limbo where demons ruled. Friends and family were helpless, watching the girl they once knew transform into a vessel of horror. The exorcisms were both salvation and tormenta, desperate struggle between light and darkness, faith and the inexplicable. By the time the rituals ended, it was clear that the exorcisms had done little to ease her suffering. Yet they had revealed the terrifying truth of her ordeal. Whatever plagued Anneliese Michel was not easily dismissed as mental illness or coincidence. It was something ancient, malevolent, and beyond human understanding. Darkness that would consume her completely in the days to come. Summer of 1976. Anneliese's physical state had deteriorated to the point of near collapse. She weighed barely 30 kilograms, her body racked by malnutrition and dehydration. She could no longer walk without assistance, yet in brief, terrifying moments, she displayed bursts of strength, throwing herself across the bed, lifting objects far heavier than her frail body should have allowed, screaming in voices that seemed older than time itself. These moments only deepened the sense of horror for those around her, a girl so weak and fragile, yet simultaneously consumed by forces that defied human understanding. On the morning of the 1st of July 1976, at the age of 23, Anneliese Michel passed away. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, but for those who had witnessed her suffering, the numbers and medical reports could never fully explain the intensity of what they had seen. For 10 months, a young woman had been caught between the human and the supernatural, between body and spirit, writhing in a nightmare that refused to end. Her death left a haunting silence in the Michel household, a quiet so profound that it seemed to carry the echoes of her screams. Her parents and the priests were devastated not only by grief but by the sense of having been powerless against forces they could neither fully understand nor control. The tapes and records of the exorcisms remained as chilling proof of her ordeal, a haunting reminder of a young life consumed by something dark, persistent, and terrifying. Even today, decades later, the story of Anneliese Michel endures. It is a tale of faith, suffering, and the blurred line between illness and the supernatural. A story that asks the question, what happens when the forces we cannot see, the darkness beyond comprehension, invade a human soul? And in her silence, Anneliese leaves a lingering, haunting answer, one that continues to unsettle and terrify all who hear her story. Anneliese Michel's death did not end the horror. It only moved it into the courtroom. Her parents and the 2 priests who performed the exorcisms were charged with negligent homicide. The case gripped Germany, raising uncomfortable questions about faith, medicine, and responsibility. Experts debated fiercely. Psychiatrists argued that Anneliese suffered from severe mental illness, epilepsy, psychosis, and depression that had gone untreated. Her parents and the priests insisted that what they witnessed was far beyond ordinary illness. Levitations, multiple voices speaking through her, and violent, impossible strength. The exorcism tapes, filled with screams and guttural voices, shocked the court and left an indelible impression on all who heard them. In the end, the jury found the defendants guilty but issued relatively light sentences, acknowledging legal responsibility while leaving the larger mystery unresolved. Anneliese's story became a chilling legacy, inspiring books, films, and debates about possession, faith, and the limits of human understanding, even decades later. Her name evokes the haunting image of a young woman caught between worlds, a soul besieged by forces unseen. Her life and suffering remain a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes darkness enters the most ordinary lives, and even faith and medicine may not be enough to save those it touches.